I want to start off by asking you both about that very fact. A lot of people look at Washington, they look at this process over the debt ceiling, and they feel like things are broken here. Congressman Quigley, start us off. What do you say to people who feel like Congress is broken?
Yeah, look, there are exceptions. I was the sponsor of two bills, Act for ALS and the Big Cat Safety Bill, which had the most bipartisan support of any bills in their term. They both passed. So if you have the same mindset and you're willing to put aside the toxicity, you can get anything done if folks are willing to compromise.
Congressman LaHood, your take?
Well, Mike and I are here today to talk about a bill we're working on in a bipartisan way. The majority of stuff that we pass in the Congress is done in a bipartisan way. These big issues that you talked about at the beginning, of course, we're going to have differences on that. We're going to have to work through them in a divided government.
We are going to delve into the details of the bill that you both are proposing in just one moment. I do want to get your reaction, though, to the news of the day and this proposal by Speaker McCarthy. Congressman LaHood, what do you make of it? Do you support his approach? And do you think it can pass?
Well, I have a lot of faith in Speaker McCarthy and the team he's put together. There's been a lot of outreach in our conference from all sections, getting their feedback on what we need to do. The other part is we have to recognize we have divided government. So for President Biden to say that he doesn't want to sit down with Kevin McCarthy, I think is just wrong. Every president has negotiated when it's come to the debt ceiling. Now, I'm not someone that said we ought to default on our debt. We shouldn't do that. But we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We ought to have a conversation about reducing spending, particularly when we're $31 trillion in debt. And that's what Speaker McCarthy is talking about, having a conversation with Joe Biden on how we have spending cuts.
So do you support Speaker McCarthy's plan, this 1 year raising the debt limit coupled with spending cuts?
I support the bill that he talked about today. I think it's the right approach to take.
Congressman Quigley, respond to that. The idea that President Biden has not invited Speaker McCarthy back to the White House. He says he's not going to until he sees his budget. Should he be meeting with Speaker McCarthy?
I think there's always room to meet, but I have to quote for the first time in my career President Trump when he said, I can't even imagine raising the debt ceiling as a negotiating wedge. Something very close to what President Reagan said. In my lifetime, we've raised the debt ceiling 78 times. 49 times under Republican leadership.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you have said that raising the debt limit should be a bipartisan issue. So would you support Speaker McCarthy's plan?
I support something like we tried to do under a Simpson-Bowles agreement 13 years ago. I was one of only 38 members of the House that ended up voting for it. It was big, balanced, bipartisan, and it covered the issue over a long period of time. It was a serious way to address it, and I support that.
So I hear some similarities in what you both are saying, and I guess if you're sitting at home watching this, the big question is the nation going to go over the cliff? How confident are you that a crisis will be averted here?
Well, the nation shouldn't go over a cliff. I don't think that's going to happen. We will avert that, but there's going to have to be negotiation. There's going to have to be compromise. But to think that we can't talk about spending cuts on reducing deficits, particularly when we spent $6 trillion through COVID, we have to reduce spending. I think that's a conversation that's easy to have with the American people. They do it every single day with their family budgets and in businesses. We ought to be able to do it here in D.C.
Congressman Quigley, your take on this, and again, do you want to see President Biden meet with Speaker McCarthy at this point in time?
Again, I think there's always room for negotiations. That's important.
So he should?
I think they should always have these discussions. I just don't think you risk this default, saying we're going to do this unless you do that. I think both minds understand we have to raise the debt ceiling, but we have to have, again, a Simpson-Bowles-like long-term comprehensive solution.
Okay, let's talk about the other major news we have been tracking, the massive leak of intelligence. And the two of you have put forward a bipartisan bill to address this. Among the penalties, $500,000. This would be civil penalties for anyone who misused or didn't carefully store classified material. Congressman LaHood, your confidence that this is going to get passed, and is this enough?
Well, first of all, it's a bipartisan bill. Congressman Quigley and I are working on this, came up with this together. It's simply unacceptable to see what's happened over the last several months with classified documents by former President Trump, President Biden, Vice President Pence, and others to have that happen. So what we did in a bipartisan way is let's figure out how we can prevent this from happening in the future. This current statute really focuses on intent and knowledge. It doesn't focus on carelessness, negligence, mistakes that were made. So what we've done in this bill, we want to make sure this never happens again in the future. So we're adding to the statute civil penalties up to $500,000 for each document that's not secured or doesn't go through the same process, but also other penalties where your pension can be taken from you, you can have your security clearance taken. We want to give more tools in the toolbox to federal prosecutors when this comes up again.
Does this bill go far enough, though?
I believe it does. And I think if you look at the bipartisan support we have already on our side and the Democrat side, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Congressman Quigley, let me get your take on this. How confident are you that this bill is going to pass? Have you gotten assurances from your fellow lawmakers that they are going to support this? Do you think you have the votes?
Yeah, well, look, we're in D.C. There are no assurances, right? But this is too big. It's a bipartisan problem, so it requires a bipartisan solution. Early take from leadership on the committees that are of note and from leadership on both sides are there is and there will be support.
And do you think that this will pass? Do you have a sense of the timeline?
I think there's broad bipartisan support. We're going to go through the committee process on this. But when people look at the inexcusable, unacceptable behavior that's gone on with classified secured documents, something has to be done.
We know that the Senate is going to be briefed tomorrow. Do you have any sense of when the House might be briefed on the classified documents leak?
There's a briefing that'll take place this week.
This week?
On this.
Do you know when that's going to be?
It'll be later this week.
And do you have confidence that you'll get the full information, the full answers to the multitude of questions that you're going to have?
Well, I don't think the investigation is thoroughly complete. Let me express the frustration, because this is a slightly different bent than the former president and vice president's misdeeds. This was someone doing this with the evil criminal intent, even if it's just for their ego. So it's a slightly different bent. I am concerned. I was on the committee, Intelligence Committee, 8 years, and we were told time and time again, yes, this is bad. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. I am concerned, especially the Department of Defense does not do enough to screen people.
Congressman LaHood, pick up on that. What is the crux of the problem here? I mean, as we point out, obviously this leak is in its own unique category, biggest leak since Edward Snowden. And yet we are also talking about the current president, the former vice president, who have not carefully enough stored classified documents. What is the problem?
Well, I think that's what we're addressing in our legislation. This is completely unacceptable. They are two separate issues. But essentially what it jeopardizes our national security. It jeopardizes our troops overseas, sometimes our nuclear codes, other security mechanisms that we have in our country. And to have people engaged at the highest level with improper storage of secure documents, having them where they shouldn't be, it's unacceptable, and that's what we're doing with our legislation.
Senator Lindsey Graham says that people should be fired over this, heads should roll. So far, no indication that's going to happen, but do you agree with him?
I think the Department of Defense has to start over, recognizing they're not doing nearly enough to make sure these documents are kept safe and that they have people properly screened, and they limit who has access to this. This person's textbook example of someone who should not have.
But do you think people should be fired over this?
Absolutely.
Do you think people should be fired over